I'm a foodie. I love trying new foods. I love trying new restaurants. Like, how can I save on that? And I'm like, don't. Save somewhere else. Figure out what you value less and cut that out. And that's why we say, let's look at housing and transportation first. Those are things that you cut those out, you never have to think about them again.
Welcome to the Midland Money Mindset. This is a podcast that's all about getting your mind right when it comes to all things money. In every episode, we go deep with engaging guests who provide tangible takeaways and a whole lot of joy along the way. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I enjoyed having them. Let's dive into today's show. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Midland Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Midland Financial. Today's guest is Jen Smith, personal finance expert and co-host of the top-rated Frugal Friends Podcast. Jen paid off $78,000 of debt in 2 years and since then has been on a mission to help people spend in alignment with their values. She is empowering them to live for today while saving for tomorrow. Jen is the author of 2 best-selling books on controlling your spending and paying off your debt, The No Spend Challenge Guide and Pay Off Your Debt for Good. Listen in for some great takeaways about Jen's journey to eradicate her debt and how she helps others eliminate theirs, allowing them to live for today while saving for tomorrow. Well, I have the pleasure today of being with Jen Smith, personal finance expert and co-host of the top-rated Frugal Friends Podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Jen. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It was great seeing you speak at FinCon and kind of getting to know you a little bit there. But for our listeners who may not know about the podcast or know about you, we'll talk a bunch about the podcast and your experience as a personal finance expert. But perhaps you could share with our listeners a little bit of background about who you are, kind of what led you to the point of being a personal finance expert and getting involved with or starting co-hosting the Frugal Friends Podcast.
I graduated college with student loan debt like so many other millennials and didn't really want to pay it off. And not that I didn't want to, it's that I thought I couldn't. I was making less per year than I had in student loan debt. And I just thought it was not attainable for me. I was spending what I thought as little as possible. I was buying generic at the grocery store, and so I thought I had it down. But it wasn't until I met my husband and we got engaged and he said, I want to pay off my student loans. And I was like, that's good for you. Great. Good. Go for it. I don't want to live the next 10 years of my life living under a rock to do this. But instead of pushing or guilting or doing all these things that we kind of think we should do to get somebody on board with the ideas we think that are right, he encouraged me to look at my own life goals. Like, we were at the precipice of starting a new life together. And he said, what do you want to do? And how could it be made easier? He said that to me before I read The One Thing by Gary Keller. When I put those 2 things together, like, it just skyrocketed my life. But that moment in our engagement was really what set us off to reimagine our finances. And we had together $78,000 of debt. We had planned to pay it off in 5 years. And once we got started, we ended paying it off in 2 years. Wow. And it was a lot of extreme lifestyle shifts that I don't recommend anymore, but were very educational. I went through the hard stuff so that now I can tell people not to. But I tried to side hustle my way out. That's how I started. Because again, I was buying the generics at the grocery store. I bought the Grande instead of the Venti at Starbucks. Like, I had this, I didn't want to change anything else about my spending.
Well, I am happy that you said you even just downgraded from the Venti to the Grande, because that's something I talk about very often. I talked about it in my book. I'm not a big believer in getting rid of it altogether because we have to have some joy in our life. So you just downgraded your joy rather than getting rid of it. I love that.
Right. But 2 months into my side hustling experience, I got shingles from overworking. I just worked myself too hard. And that was the moment when I had to start looking at my spending and being like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm getting the grande instead of the venti, but do I need every single grande I'm getting like almost every single day? And I really went from one extreme to the other where I just stopped spending on almost everything altogether. And that wasn't the answer either. So we spent these 2 years living in this really extreme lifestyle. I was miserable. When we finally paid off the debt, I was excited, but I really didn't know what to do with myself. And so I started spending money again without thinking, without budgeting. And I got laid off from my job about 9 months later. That just coincided with we were about a year into Frugal Friends, where we were telling people how to live this extreme frugal life. And I had this identity crisis being like, okay, now I have to think about my spending again, but I can't go back to the way it was. There has to be some middle ground between spending frivolously and spending nothing. And for the last 5 years, Frugal Friends has been that experiment, that journey. And how do we get the things that we love without going broke?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So I guess you give an amount of hope to those people, because we've been hearing a lot about student debt, especially over the last year and a half, right? So I think your story really lends a lot of hope to those that may be riddled with that student debt, that there is an ability to get out of it. It may not happen as quickly as it did for you, because it may not be advisable to completely cut everything out. But with that being said, even if they were to cut back to some degree, it would allow them to pay off those student loans much more quickly than never, right?
Yeah. I mean, even if it takes you 3 years or 4 years to pay off $78,000 of debt, that's still an amazing story. There is a middle ground for everyone where it's going to take some friction. It's going to take some lifestyle change, but it doesn't mean that you have to live miserably or live under a rock, is what I always used to say.
Yeah. So my understanding was you were an acupuncturist, right? So you went from acupuncturist to podcast host. Was it this personal experience that really led you to launching the Frugal Friends podcast, or were there other things really embedded there as well that led you to do that?
I'm glad you bring that up, because not a lot of people look that deeply into my backstory. So I was an acupuncturist for 5 years, but I worked at a community acupuncture clinic. So we worked on a sliding scale model, making acupuncture or quality acupuncture more affordable to more people. So it wasn't like a nonprofit or anything. It was a for-profit business, but just at scale to be available to more people. And that's really the mindset I took in when I started writing about personal finance. I just started it as a side hustle. And then eventually it took off so much that I was making more with the writing than I was with the acupuncture. And so it was a super hard decision to switch over, because my acupuncture job felt like I was giving back to my community. It was checking all the boxes off for me of dream job. And so I was like, how can I take this and put it into personal finance? Something that's usually very stuffy, usually very get as much money as you can focused. How can I shift that mindset and make this education, this information as accessible to as many people as possible and still make a living wage? So that's how we've looked at Frugal Friends, is we want to be accessible to our listeners. It's kind of funny, like you wouldn't think a Frugal Friends podcast has advertising, but we are on the iHeart Network. We take advertising money, and it's so we can be free to listen to.
Sure. And are you getting as much joy now out of what you're doing today as you were as being an acupuncturist?
Even more so, even more.
Great.
I just get a lot of, I think I get a lot more emails from people saying like how our episodes have impacted them or how our social media posts have impacted them. So I could be doing just as much good if I'd stayed an acupuncturist, but I am really, really happy to be my own boss, to have my own time flexibility and still be impacting lots of people positively.
Yeah. And I think you're a great example, and we talk about it all the time. You don't have to go from what you're currently doing today to making that leap to something new or entrepreneurial all at once, especially in entrepreneurial. I think it's much easier today, lower barriers to entry than maybe 20 or even maybe 10 years ago to kind of create that side hustle because you enjoy it. You want to see if it's something you're passionate about that can actually proof out as a concept. And if it does, slowly make that transition. You don't have to leave that full-time gig where you have that safety and security until you're confident that you have that safety and security on the other side. So I think you're a great example of that. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to clarify because some people might hear the word frugal and might associate it with the word cheap. And I don't know that that's the case. So how is being frugal different than being cheap?
So the word frugal has been really demonized over the last 100 years. So we've really been taught that more is more, that when you have more, you're smarter or you're more successful. When you want more, you're smarter or more successful. You know something that somebody else doesn't. We've been trained by marketing and advertising professionals very intentionally to believe this. What do we do when we want more? We need more to be worthy. We have to buy it at lower prices. And so that's where frugality has shifted to this, I can get more for less, this cheapness. So frugality for us is being a good and wise steward of your resources, your money, your time, other people's time and resources, natural resources, your mental energy, your physical space. It all has to do with positive changes to you, the people around you, and the earth around you. That's frugality to us. And 100 years ago, that's what frugality was to everyone. Now, it's kind of synonymous with cheap, and we're trying to separate those two. Cheap is saving money or time or any resources at the expense of someone or something else. So it's going to the restaurant and not tipping. It's going out with friends and getting the most expensive thing and splitting it evenly. It's all these things that we just look at someone, we don't want to be that, but that's not frugal. That's cheap.
Right.
It's that more is more mentality at the expense of other people.
Yeah, I hear your acupuncture days and your schooling and kind of filtering through in that description about mental and physical resources. Am I wrong? I mean, it seems somewhat synonymous. So you're probably flexing some of that muscle in what you're doing today as a result.
Absolutely. Because we're whole people. We don't want money for the sake of money. Like some of us like to see big numbers in our bank accounts, but that's for security. It's not for, I like green dollar bills in my hand just because I like looking at them. We like money for security, for freedom. We think we want money for things, right? But that's not what we want money so that we can pursue the things money can't buy with more freedom. And that's the same with acupuncture, looking at people as the whole person and looking at the root cause of why somebody might be sick.
Right. Can you maybe give us an example? Because I think when we talk about frugality versus cheap, right away, it's a monetary thing, right? We don't necessarily think about it in terms of using frugal living to preserve your time, physical space, and natural resources, that part of it. It's more, I think our minds go to the monetary aspect. Could you just give us an example of how being frugal can help you in those areas with your physical space, natural resources, et cetera?
We look at frugality as being efficient with your time and your money. So one example of that is using the 80-20 principle to figure out what am I going to choose to save money on and what am I going to care less about? Not care about, not at all, but just less about. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the three things that Americans spend most of their take-home pay on are housing, transportation, and food. We like to focus on those three things first. And in that order. It's not always easy to focus on them in that order, but when we try to do it backwards, we start spinning our wheels more and it becomes harder to stick with. So like a car, for instance, something really simple. We choose used instead of new. It's not that we're choosing crappy cars that don't work.
Right.
A lot of times when we say that, people are like, but I want my car to work. And I was like, nobody ever said you should buy a car that doesn't work. We're just saying if you buy comparable cars, new versus used, you're going to save about $200 a month on that auto loan, right? And that's
Right.
$200 a month. You're probably not spending that in lattes every month. That's one decision that you've made for the next 4 years that has saved you more than 20 decisions to say no to a latte could.
Mhm.
That's one of the principles, is just being efficient with how we look at saving money. And the other big one, this is under the food category, is reducing food waste. So we talk a lot about food because that's, of the three, the lowest barrier to entry for saving. So we are making meal plans that are realistic, that are not like, oh, I'm going to make a meal plan, so I might as well make it like as healthy as possible and as cheap as possible and all these other things. We're looking at, what's my season in life? What can I actually commit to? So I'm not just buying food for a meal plan that I'm never actually going to follow through with, and I'm going to end up double dipping and getting takeout anyway. And this also helps reduce food waste, which is great for the environment. So on those nights where I'm like, it's only going to take 15 minutes to prep dinner, but I really don't want to, we have this added intrinsic motivation to do it. It's not just saving me money to do this, but it's also impacting my community and the world. And it's good for everyone that I do this. So even though I don't really want to follow through with my realistic meal plan, I have a little more intrinsic motivation to do it.
We're taking a quick detour from the amazing show today to bring you our best-selling book, Financial Planning Made Personal. Gone are the days of one-size-fits-all financial strategies, and this book helps you find joy in the journey while planning for your ideal tomorrow. Because we believe in letting you experience the joy of finance firsthand, we're giving free access to the first 2 chapters at financialplanningmadepersonal.com. Before we return to the show, I have a question for you. What did you do today that brought you joy? Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because my wife and I, over the last couple of years, we started using, and this isn't a commercial for them, but we started using HelloFresh. And although HelloFresh is probably more expensive, or more expensive in certain ways to certain people, when we started looking at us going to the supermarket and buying stuff and cooking it, there was a lot of it that was going to waste because we weren't using it in time, et cetera. Whereas with the HelloFresh, we're just getting enough stuff to make that meal, and we're eating it, and then we're done, and there's no waste. So it's been tremendously helpful for us. And we think overall, even though it's maybe more expensive in the short run, in the long run, it was actually less expensive for us.
Mm-hmm. And it probably helps you from getting takeout or going out somewhere
100%.
because you're more motivated. Right. So even in the upfront, when it costs a little more, overall does save money and resources. And that's really the goal, is we're looking at getting away from that race to the bottom that frugality has traditionally been seen as. How can I spend as little as possible and get the most for as little as possible? And we're looking at, how can I get the best return on my investment? How can I get the best durability, longevity, smartest purchase? Even if I'm spending a little bit more upfront, we're looking at long term.
Yeah, agreed. So part of the reason I wrote my book, Financial Planning Made Personal, was because of the spend shaming that people often face, right? When they sit down with an advisor or somebody who a trusted advisor, and they look at their budget and they start expense shaming. Oh, well, you're spending too much here or spending too much there. And I don't believe in that, because I think budgeting and spending is very personal. What brings one person joy may not bring another, and it might be something could be cut there, but not in another situation. And this is why your tagline, "We help you control your spending without all the guilt and shame of strict budgeting," really resonated with me. Could you share what you mean by this?
Absolutely. We feel the same way, is that you can value anything. And we were just on a podcast yesterday where the host was like, I'm a foodie. I love trying new foods. I love trying new restaurants.
Me too.
Like, how can I save on that? And I was like, don't. Save somewhere else. Figure out what you value less and cut that out. And that's why we say, let's look at housing and transportation first. Those are things that you cut those out, you never have to think about them again, maybe for another 5, 10, 20 years. So just small changes in big places can help you say more yeses to the things that you value. And unfortunately, as frugal people, we tend to be the most judgmental about how other people spend when we're spending less. But we say all the time, like, you can value anything and you can value nice things and be frugal. That's another thing. People who like to spend money on nice things don't think they can be frugal. The frugality comes in is identifying what you don't value. So when advertising and friends and influencers try to slip that in to your budget, you can say a hard no. It's knowing where to say no so that you can say better yeses.
Yeah. I heard the word values in there a couple of times, right? And I'm a big believer in personal core values for our company, our business. I think it's something that everybody should have a foundational written down version. Why do you think, because I'm thinking that you're in alignment with that, why do you think it's so important for people to find their core values?
Because we're being told every day that we should value everything, that we should want everything, or at least the next thing that we want will solve a problem that we've had. To take the time to do the hard work and figure out, okay, what have I spent on? What has gotten me the result that I wanted? And what has not? To sit down and do that hard work and decide, okay, these things got me what I wanted. When I got coffee with a friend and I was able to see that friend like out of town, I wasn't able to bring them over to my house. That got me what I wanted. That's an expense I value. But over here, when I was just getting coffee at the drive-thru and I didn't even realize I was in the drive-thru till I was there, that didn't get me. I don't even know what I wanted in that moment. So it's looking at that and doing the hard work of figuring out what is me and what is influence.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. Along those same lines, I laughed the first time I heard you describe budgeting. And you said, budgets are the diets of the financial industry. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what you mean by that? I think I understand that, but I think it's important for us to share that. How do you advise people to go about it so that it doesn't end up being like a diet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would make budgets a lot before I committed to paying off debt. And I would never stick with them because they were perfect. These budgets were the perfect. They showed that I could put so much towards debt and I didn't have to spend anything on eating out or doing activities. They were just perfect. Much like diets, keto, paleo, macros. These are perfect diets that we will never live up to. But you can have guidelines and plans that you can strive for. We think spending plans are more appropriate in that they're very flexible. You are still making sure you're on track to meeting a financial goal in a certain timeline. But when you are inevitably living life and something comes up you could not have planned for, it feels less like a defeat, which I don't know why life feels so much like a defeat when you're on a budget. But this just makes it feel like, oh, okay, yeah, this was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew something was going to happen. And here it is in my spending plan. I didn't know what it was going to be. I couldn't categorize it, but it just feels like an integrated part. When we put strict zero-based, I love a zero-based budget as long as it's flexible, but these really strict zero-based budgets with 20 categories that are so rigid, they're perfect. They look beautiful. Yeah. And you're never going to live up to one because you're not perfect. And I say that to myself. I'm saying that looking at myself. We just got to give ourselves more grace. And I think falling in love with the lifestyle of frugality and spending less is a far better focus than sticking to a self-imposed budget. When you focus on the budget, it's a lot harder to stick to it. But when you focus on the lifestyle and falling in love with the identity and the practices of frugality, much easier. The byproduct is sticking to that budget.
Agreed. And I think the problem for most people, or the challenge for most people, is just like the diet analogy. They expect to start exercising today and look like that perfect situation tomorrow. And it doesn't work out that way. Same thing with your budget. You can create that, to your point, to your words, that perfect budget, but it's not going to necessarily look like that tomorrow. It's going to take time to look at where you're spending, to continue to refine it. And I think looking at the lifestyle and creating the lifestyle around it, it kind of eliminates the need for the budget. And similar with that, you're not going to go from today and all of a sudden say, hey, I'm living a frugal lifestyle. It's going to be something that you design and develop over time that's just going to be tremendously impactful. So to quote James Clear in Atomic Habits, as long as we're getting 1% better every day and working towards that goal, I think that's really what we should be striving for to make that happen ultimately. I want to shift gears for a second towards your website. You have a place on your website to submit a bill of the week. So how did you come up with this creative interactive feature? And what is the purpose of it?
So I think the bill of the week actually came at the same time as we thought about the podcast. It was, we should do a podcast. And if we did, we would do this segment. And it was really just because people love to hear themselves on the radio. People love to hear themselves on shows. So it gives people the opportunity to do that. And it's just a funny break. Some personal finance topics are very serious. And you have to have a dose of humor in there if you're going to survive it. And
Agreed.
So I think the bill of the week, it's an opportunity for celebration because we say it can be any bill. It can be a bill you saved, a dollar bill you found, a guy named Bill, a duck bill, Buffalo Bills. So it's very broad and vague for a reason. Another thing Frugality gives is the opportunity to be creative. Instead of spending money immediately to meet our needs or solve a problem, Frugality encourages you to put a pause between that buy now button and your money and think, how can I reuse something I already have, borrow something from a friend, get something for free, like repair or repurpose something? Like, how can I do that, get it used, think those things through before automatically buying new at full price or even on sale? So that's kind of what the bill of the week is. It's people are getting creative in, okay, what's my bill? I want to call in. What is my bill? And we hear the greatest, sometimes it's celebration. People paid off a debt and stopped a bill. And sometimes it's people found like a really cool new side hustle that's helping them pay their bills. And sometimes it's Bill, the builder.
So for you, let me ask you this. What's been the most memorable bill for you that you recall?
Oh, okay. So this one, as much as I love the funny ones, this one actually really was so close to my heart. A listener emailed me and she was like, my father Bill is about to pass away. Oh, and I just called and left my bill is him. And we have a 6-month backlog. So she was emailing, be like, hey, can you get it in there a little early? So I want to play it for him.
Right.
And my dad died when I was 16. And so I just felt so close to her. We got it in the next episode and I emailed her and I was like, thank you so much. This is insane that this is what you would do for your father.
Right.
It's share him on our show, but thank you. And that was the most memorable bill for me.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So let's talk about the podcast for a second. You've had over 350 episodes released. Let's talk about the podcasting aspect of things, because I think that it's still a bit of an untapped medium. I think you and I are probably a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of this space. What advice do you have for those that may be considering getting into the podcasting space?
There are a lot of things that I would say are over, but podcasting is not one of them. But I would say you definitely have to, now you can't just rest on your podcasting laurels alone. You have to integrate it with something else, either YouTube or social media. There's got to be a visual aspect to it. Anybody getting into podcasting, it's still a fantastic long form content. Our attention spans are dwindling. It's hard for those of us with hour-long podcasts, but you get so much time to build a relationship with somebody, being in their ear for so long. You also have to pair that with being in their eyes and ears for short bits of time too.
Yeah. I think that's great advice, something that we took into account before launching ours. So hopefully you podcasters out there, or if you're thinking about getting in there, you take that to heart. So Jen, listen, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. We ask each of our guests the same last question. As we've talked throughout, we're all about joy on the Midland Money Mindset. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
I had my morning cup of coffee. I wake up and I've got 2 kids running around, and I just make that cup of coffee at home. And sometimes if I'm having a tough day, I'll bring that cup of coffee with me in the car so that I'm not buying one out of stress when I drop them off. But yeah, it's always just this line in the sand being like, okay, now my day can start because I got my cup of coffee in my nice mug.
Amazing. So do you have a go-to coffee?
So I'm in Florida, and there's a local brewer called Bones Coffee Company, and they make all kinds of flavored coffee beans. And so they smell fantastic. They taste great. I don't even have to put sugar or flavoring in my coffee anymore. So I really like there's a dark chocolate caramel one that I'm using right now. I love it. Cannoli is my favorite.
All right. Have you ever had Cafe Du Monde coffee?
Yes, I just had it when we were in New Orleans in October for the first time. I was scared that it was going to be very too strong, but it was very good.
Yeah, we order that, the ground up, and we put it in our reusable K-cups and make it in the Keurig, and it's spot on. Really good. I highly recommend it. So, Jen, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, but if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn more about the Frugal Friends podcast or Modern Frugality, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Well, wherever you're listening to this podcast, head to Frugal Friends and subscribe. We release episodes every Tuesday and Friday. And then head to frugalfriendspodcast.com and sign up for our friend letter. It's our 3 times weekly newsletter where we're sharing where to get free food, free activities that might be coming up in your area, savings hacks, and deep dives into consumer products that you can be sure you're getting affordable quality and not cheap quantity.
Great. Good point. Well, thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for taking out the time for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And be sure to enjoy the day.
Oh, thank you. You as well.
I want to thank Jen Smith for being a guest on the Midland Money Mindset. Jen understands the challenges of eliminating debt. Now that she has successfully accomplished her goal of being debt-free, she's now helping others do the same. We are completely aligned in that people need to balance living for today while saving for tomorrow too. She gets it, and she's helping others to get it too. Jen Smith and the Frugal Friends podcast can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes. Thank you for joining us this week on the Midland Money Mindset. Make sure you visit our website at midlandmoneymindset.com and smash the subscribe button so you don't miss a show. We encourage you to help others find our valuable content, and please don't keep us a secret. You can also schedule an Is There a Fit call right from our website or by using the link that you'll find in the description section of your podcast player or app. And be sure to join us for our next episode to learn more about getting your mind right when it comes to all things money.
The opinions voiced in the Midland Money Mindset Show with Lawrence Sprung are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy ensures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advisory services offered through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Guests on the Midland Money Mindset Show are not affiliated with CWM LLC.